tree trunks. How can we get some really realistic looking tree trunks? We have trees and they seem to have a wire center of them, but we could do with having a really realistic tree trunk for some kinds of trees. Here's a technique that I've developed that you can use to get some really good looking tree trunks, and it involves a bunch of spinach. What we really need is the roots. So we take our knife and we're going to chop the roots off. Eat your spinach, cook it up and eat it now if you like, but what we're interested in is the roots. Nice hairy ones are really good, but we can't use it right now. We have to leave it drying for a couple of days, so then we can use it, and I'll show you just in a minute how that is. The next step is after a couple of days have gone past, 1 or 2, the root will start to dry out a little bit and start getting quite leathery on its skin, but quite soft in the pith. That's the way we want it. We don't want it too dry, but we want it to evaporate a little bit. So we're going to get a tree, for example, a pine tree here, and then measure so that we're going to get a trunk approximately that long, and chop it off. Now, if you were to do this when the root was fresh, it would split. That's why we've had to let it dry a little bit so that it evaporates some of the water, and now it will go in the root okay. We're going to let that dry for as long as a week, and that should shrink down onto the trunk. Now that's the bottom fat end of the root. Now the next section of the root you can take like this and get a piece of thin wire, or copper wire like this, and carefully thread it up it, so that the reason for that is that when it dries, the root is very brittle and it will snap if you try and bend it around. So in this case, I'm feeding it right up the center hopefully without having it come through the bark, as it were. And then I can chop that off at the end of the wire and cut off the bottom end of the trunk, and you'll have a trunk like this which will shrink down to being okay, and we will also show you what to do with that very shortly. So we'll have one kind of tree that's going to have a nice thick trunk like the pine tree. You're going to have a thinner trunk that you can, with the wire, you can bend it around and compose it as you want. And the third, very fine tip of it, but the last tips, you can feed a wire up the root to make a third kind of tree out of the one little root, making sure that you don't poke it through the skin of the root. Now the pine tree trunk, even though it looks really fat while it's not dry, after a few days or even a few weeks, the trunk shrinks right down onto the wire, and you get a nice, really realistic wooden looking trunk. Now the middle piece of the root that we put the wire up, it also shrinks down until you've got a very wooden looking stick that, because it's got the wire up the middle, you can carefully bend it round and compose it as a tree might be. And then you can get a piece of other tree and glue it into the base of it, so you get a tree like that. Now the third kind of tree, from the very tips of the roots of the spinach, or if you have a spinach root that's very small like this one was, you get a nice hairy piece on the end. Now what I'm going to do now is take some glue and some white glue and dab it on all the tips of these bits, then I get some fiber that I've cut from twine to pieces, and then I'm going to just sort of sprinkle it all over so that it sticks to it. Shake it off, and we'll get a very hairy sort of treetop. And that's going to have a result of a fairly tight sort of tree. Once we get the glue on, you're going to get a vegetation that's not very widespread, and it's going to be fairly tight to the trunk, because I'll show you with the next kind. We're going to do the sprinkling and gluing with the brush a few times, just so that it gets, that's the first time you get it fairly, several times.